Hey everyone, thanks for joining, and thanks for that great intro as well. My name is Matthew Santone. I'm principal designer here at Argo Design, and I'm just excited to share what I've experienced in design and designing AI and artificial intelligence in the last 4 years, almost 5 years that I've been working in it now. I like to call my working title instead Squirrels AI in the fourth epoch of computing, but we'll get into a little bit of that later. Anytime I open up a conversation on artificial intelligence, I need to acknowledge this great debate. There's a really visionary aspect to artificial intelligence. It's a sort of fantastical scientific endeavor. There's this audacity that we're going to reproduce human cognition when we don't fully understand human cognition in itself. Some have called it a modern day space race. You have Hollywood adding to the flavor too, with their sort of wild depictions of general artificial intelligence and that sort of misleading, many times clickbait headlines that we see in the news. On one end we have Elon Musk saying it's going to be the summoning of the demon, or Claude Shannon saying it's going to be a time where humans are dogs to robots, and he's rooting for the machines. Words like that obviously bring up visuals like Boston Dynamics, and their dogs sort of breaking into your house and stealing your medicine or your children. But on the other end, you have people like Sidipo Ganache saying it's, not this man versus machine saga. It's much more synergistic. And those bring up these sort of visuals of Blade Runner and, Altered Carbon, and this sort of more helpful and fantastical idea of, these AIs living alongside of us. There's Stephen Hawking. I think he really knows how to hedge his bets, saying AI is either likely to be the best or the worst thing that happens to humanity. And I think the reason why there's a sort of, vagueness or misunderstanding around general this idea of artificial intelligence is there's these two divisions here. I like to call what is AI today and what AI isn't, or might possibly be one day. AI today is specialized intelligence, and the things of Hollywood are this general purpose intelligence. If I were to ask you what's smarter, an adult human being or a squirrel, most people will quickly react and say, of course, a human being is smarter than a squirrel. But if I were to tell you, the squirrel has this unique skill of being able to bury upwards of 10,000 nuts, and they can then recall where each one of those nuts are. And not just generally where the nuts are, but they recall them based on their preference. They know that their favorite nuts are over here and their sort of secondary favorite nuts are over there. And that very specialized skill, I would say squirrels are smarter than we are. And that's why general intelligence is sort of a complicated thing. It's not the singular thing that you build. It's thousands of modalities of specialized intelligence, and then this ability to sort of transverse across them and learn from one and apply to others. If we sort of just give an example, a real world of that, autonomous driving, you can somewhat easily teach a car or a system in a car to recognize the speed limit sign, speed limit 25. And that translates to a car can drive 25 miles an hour in this zone. You could trade it on a robust enough data set that different lighting conditions and different instances, it sees this sign and it's able to behave and react very well accordingly. But the moment you show a sign like this, school, speed limit 25, when children are present, you've introduced some varying levels of complexity. This AI has no idea what school is or children or the presence of children. It has no idea of school zones or why, children present should have any sort of notion to this. You quickly blow the school's minds. The specialized intelligence works very focused and very well at one specific thing with one data set and one set of parameters. And the moment you sort of move out of that, it falls down quickly. So what we're doing is we're not sort of building this, greater and more smart general intelligence. We're building lots of squirrels. Each squirrel having its own sort of little skill that it's very, very good at. And we're continuing to build more and more of these squirrels, really sort of building this army of squirrel AIs that can do, so many unique things for us. And we're really at this point where we're seeing the sort of speed of innovation in AI really pick up. It's not a new thing. It's gone through the hype cycle, at least multiple times. But we're at, in the last several years, some unique outputs and unique victories in the AI space. And the reasons for that, I would say, one, AI has become good enough. We're seeing out of academia results that are interesting, that would spur enough, monetary investment and willingness to move this forward. And two, it's no longer a programmer's black art. We're seeing this democratization of the tooling, the software. It's very akin to front page coming out and allowing, a bunch of people now to be able to create web pages. We're seeing sort of the introduction of new tooling as well as hardware to allow a much broader group of people to participate, and in return, sort of a quickening of the innovation in this space. This is Cortex Studio. It's a piece of software I worked on for a little over 4 years, it becoming the first visual graphical interface for orchestrating AI. Building this was unique. There wasn't a lot of visual paradigms to pull on. So really digging in, inventing where we needed to, but trying to stay benign when we didn't need to. This tooling then begins to allow a much broader set of developers to participate in this space. And another piece here is beyond the software is the chips, the hardware, the sensors that are being developed. And it's not this giant box here that's just a PC in a box, but inside of this box is a writable AI chip, where with this software, this startup I worked on, you're able to quickly deploy an AI to a chip and see how it performs in the real world, how well the translation from software down into hardware, and see quickly and being able to innovate and test quickly. Again, both of these sort of spurring on innovation in this space. And then even more so, this AI space is the foundational backbone to this next pattern of computing we're seeing, this spatial computing. The sensors and object recognition and classifiers and NLP and all of this sort of becoming a interesting, new way of looking at computing. So the big now, so now what? Great, all this is happening. What is the impact? As a designer, the interfaces we're building, my role as a designer and in computation itself, interfaces are definitely changing. How we create things, Photoshops of the world where you have sort of dense UI, AI is able to come in and sort of remove interfaces entirely. This is the work of Mimo Adkin, a computational artist, where on the left is a real-time webcam and on the right is an AI that's just been trained only on waterscapes. So it does its best to translate what it sees into what it knows. The same AI, but trained on fire instead. No interface whatsoever. Anyone, a child could pick up these objects and begin to draw, in a sense, or paint. This is recent work by Cyril, where, real world copy and paste. I could point my phone or my spatial computing device at an object, capture it, and paste it right into my design work. Or Google, they're completing our emails for us, and I'm soon probably writing entire emails for us. Or even AI where, I could become a country rock star if I want. I give it a few words and a couple parameters and I get an entire song it writes for me. Beyond that, we're seeing, how we sort and discover is changing. So much of sort and discovery, we have sort of decades of software that tries to help us, find the photos that we want to find. But now I can just search on my phone for cat, and it's going to show me all the photos of my cats on my phone, using object recognition, or, wine cellar, or croissant. I think croissant must be failing to recognize because I eat a lot more croissants than this. So maybe some work to be done there. Or even interesting things like this is Mikado and his family, Japanese cucumber farmers. He saw his mom working, 8 to 10 hour shifts where her job is just to sort cucumbers based on, I think, 8 to 10 different parameters of, length and curve and bruising and all that. Well, he wrote, with open source, TensorFlow and a camera and a little bit of work, a program that would look at the cucumber, assess it across those parameters, and quickly got up to the 80% accuracy rate. Or just being able to sort across, sort of dense medical records and imagery, and being able to find, new patterns and diseases, or even Google's sort of look at, what planets should we be looking at. How we make decisions is changing. So much of decision making is around building up context in the interface. What should I eat for dinner? And where do you live? And what time it is? And what are you looking for? Or AI can take, fuzzy data sets and concurrent data sets, and you and your friends, and offer interesting suggestions. I had to update this to, instead of how about a dinner, how about a Zoom dinner with Heather and John over at Home Slice, 6:30. Just the painful decision of car buying. Maybe it just makes decisions based on mine and my wife's preferences and our budget, and just gives me options. And I have a slider at the bottom where I can sort of slide between my preferences and my wife's. House buying. I just want an interface where, it looks at my ability to purchase and my interests, and it just sends an autonomous car to my house, picks me up and drives me around the neighborhood and shows me houses that would be of interest to me, with overlays of what the details are for that. Stepping up for interfaces, the designer, the role of the designer is changing, and I'm feeling this, every day, moving from a pixel pusher to this sort of design orchestrator. Here at Argo, we like to talk about Cyrano de Bergerac. If you're not familiar with it, or at least the Steve Martin remake movie of it, Cyrano would sit in the bushes and speak to his friend Christian, so that Christian could speak to this woman he was in love with, and he would feed him lines so he would look smarter and more eloquent. In the same way, AI is becoming a designer's greatest asset, where I can just quickly jot down some sketches, and it translates that into, polished, at least wires or designs. I can ask AI to make stock images for me with, tons of levers of what I'm looking for. Or even proactive, where I'm working in a design and it's, able to look at usability data that has come out of research and offer layout suggestions, or even just visual suggestions on how I could change up what I'm working on. We're already seeing the beginning of this in Microsoft's PowerPoint Designer. Or I can send it on errands, get me latest color trends, or, pull back a presentation, show me a presentation on, the current state of audio design interfaces for inspiration. I almost want to say there's this ton of chance to bring back Clippy in a sense, but better and stronger. We'll rebuild them to be the best Clippy yet. And even coming up one more step, computing is changing because of all of this. We're moving computing into the real space. It's coming out of our phones and desktops and onto the world around us. We're seeing through either heads-up displays or projection or combinations of all of that, the markup of the physical world, where, we can begin to have interfaces anywhere that are there when we need them and not there when we don't. They begin to integrate in our space, and respect the real world objects around them. And not even just respect the real world objects, but allow objects to participate. I say, computer, this coffee mug, I want it to be a scroll knob or a volume knob, or I want this sticky note to be a light switch now. And even cooperative, as we move from our heads down phones and out to the real space, computing can become this sort of much more interesting cooperative space as well. And I think a really interesting notion, again, as computing moves out into the world around us, this idea of return of multitasking. The phone has sort of stifled us into, one moment at a time, or one thought at a time, but being able to lay out a handful of computations around us, and these sort of unique squirrels that we have for our AI functions, we're able to not just have these things around us, but to ad hoc sort of, take one application and string several together along with AI into, sort of ad hoc new multitasking workflow, being able to build new and unique workflows on the fly. If I'm going to just close with us here, all of this going on around us, we're obviously going to be changing as well. We can't sort of have the impact of this and have no impact on ourselves. And I say sort of instead of building this Skynet or this scary general artificial intelligence that's going to become autonomous and overthrow us, it's more this idea of augmentation versus emulation. We're building an augmented version of ourselves, I think is much more interesting than the emulated version. Being able to augment our senses and our touch, being able to augment our physical capabilities and hand coordination to our hearing and sensory. We're almost building, and I guess not almost, we are building this human computer now. It's an interesting moment where we may be at the beginning of technological evolution, where we sort of begin to subvert the organic evolution and sort of take charge of our own future in this sense. So if we go back to Stephen Hawking, AI is going to be the best or worst thing to happen to humanity. I think he actually nailed it. It's, often we like to sort of give positive or negative attributes to technology, but it's us as human beings and how we raise it and how we evolve it and how we use it that becomes good or evil. So the reason why I am so active in this space and will continue to be is this sort of mantra of, why fear the worst future when, we as designers can help design a better one, take control of that and be a part of that and help steer that, as opposed to just sit back in either ignorance or fear and just sort of let it wash over us. So thank you so much. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming and listening to me. I will be around here right after this if you have any questions. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Matthew from Argo Design. You shared a lot of very interesting and insightful thoughts in terms of artificial intelligence and really thinking about the overall ethical implications. Branching out there too, can you expand on what you think about the socioeconomic implications and accessibility to all humans?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Technology in general, there's a bit of a divide there, the people that have and the people that have not. It is a very, it's a tricky thing that we're going to have to solve together. Again, I think it's even all more the reason that we need to get lots of people involved in this, not just the white male that I am, but, people from all walks of life should be involved in steering this future of what AI is going to be and be for us. We can't just have, the small voices that we have right now and the biases that we have right now. So I think the more the people that can get involved, the more accessible and useful this future will be for us.
Excellent. And I do love your anecdotal example of squirrels. It's very effective, and I think people can relate to that. How can then people get more involved themselves as an individual? You talk about getting more people involved, but how can I, for example, help contribute?
Yeah, it would depend on what your role is as an individual. I think moving forward, there'll be an opportunity for more exposure. I know classroom-wise, this is starting to make its way into at least college level. I know in Stanford, they're doing the sort of, they have these flashcards they've started to develop that sort of AI explanation for common folk. So there needs to be sort of a education, so that it's not this sort of scary thing, the reality of it. And then as you are in your job, and AI finds its way into certain workforces and your exposure to it, to sort of embrace and understand how you will sort of work with that technology. I look at it sort of we need to raise AI as opposed to it being this separate thing or this side tool that we have to get exposed to.
Excellent. With that said, I want to thank you for your time today, Matthew, and that concludes our session. For those of you, we will take a short break and we'll be back in about 8 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.